Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again in this YouTube astrological segment. We're going to be talking about astrology and the death of Diego Maradona. Now, many of you may know Diego Maradona was a legendary footballer. He passed away suddenly as a result of cardiac arrest, a heart attack. And like roughly 2 weeks prior to that, he had been treated for brain surgery. Apparently, there was some blood clot in his brain, and there had been some bleeding related to the brain. And I'm going to talk about some transits and natal placements that may have been tied into his passing. And the thing about this is, first off, I want to offer my condolences and prayers to the family members and close friends of Diego Maradona. I mean, he died at the age of 60. That's a relatively young age to die, and it's terrible and very devastating, tragic, and traumatic that something like this would happen to somebody at a relatively young age. And Diego Maradona was regarded as one of the greatest footballers that we've ever in history. Again, let me talk about some natal placements and transits that might have been tied into his passing. I may even talk about some other things in his chart as well. But anyway, well, the first thing looking at stands out. Transit Neptune was in at least fairly close proximity to his natal moon in Pisces. Some may see this as Neptune, moon in astrology, is associated with the soul. Neptune is about dissolving and dissipation. And maybe, perhaps this may have manifested in the dissolving and dissipation of um, one's soul. And although depending on your belief, though, it can be about the soul, you know, moves on, but depending on your belief, it can be perceived as that. But still, when you have you're talking about when Neptune hitting. Sun, Moon, and Ascendant are the three main proponents of the physical body. And when you're talking about transit Neptune hitting one of those points, it can indicate certain weakness at that time. You might strongly feel the effects of Neptune is also about hospitalization, and he had been hospitalized. And you're talking about the moon is also about nurturing energy, so you could basically being cared for. So you could do the math, and Neptune, Pisces energy is very compassionate energy as well. This is also a time too where, looking at this, he also had transit Mars very close to the sixth house cusp. Transit Mars in Aries. Mars could be about physical debilitations, injuries. Aries can be associated with the brain, but also bleeding as well. And so it's not surprising he had a transit like this at the time. Now, also too, he has Jupiter in his natal chart. Jupiter in Capricorn at a critical degree. Jupiter is in its fall in Capricorn, and also Jupiter is also can be associated with bleeding like Mars. Now, another thing when I'm looking at his chart as well, transit North Node in Gemini was not far from his natal 8th house cusp. And you're talking about the North Node in astrology, and transit can be about issues one may have to confront and address. The 8th house cusp is, of course, about death. It's also about surgery. The ruler of his 8th house of death and surgery, it falls in his 12th house, and that ruler is Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. And Mercury, of course, is associated with the brain. Scorpio is about is a sign associated with surgery. And another thing too is, speaking of Neptune, going back to Neptune, he does have in his chart the Sun, natal Sun is conjunct Neptune, so it's an indicator. Neptune is about hospitalization. It's not surprising that at some point his you're talking the Sun can be associated with the physical body. and Neptune can be about hospitalization as well. It's also an indicator of weakness of the physical body of some point in time, the dissolving dissipation of life. We all pass away at some time, of course, but I'm thinking this could be an indicator of maybe, the passing of life maybe a little bit earlier than average. This is also, in some cases, can be weakness of the physical body, but given it's in Scorpio, it wouldn't surprise me if at some point in time that he may have had some issues with the colon, the bladder, the prostate, in the 12th house again of hospitalization. Uh, Another thing too is when I'm looking at his chart, one of the rulers of the 4th house, he has Aquarius on the cusp of his 4th house. One of the rulers falls in the 10th house of notoriety and recognition, and 4th house in astrology is associated with the end of life. Now, the end of life, not surprising then that one of those rulers being in the 10th house is something that gained a lot of notoriety and recognition. It's also that one of those rulers, Uranus, is in Leo, the sign really strongly associated um, with attention and recognition as well, and notoriety. Now, another thing is he has Pluto also in his 10th house, so that's another indicator of a death that would garner a lot of notoriety and recognition and attention that would be very public. Now, another thing too is when I'm looking at his chart as well, is that he also at this time he had Mercury, transit Mercury was in his 12th house as well, and at the time of the surgery, he likely had transit Mercury. I mean, I'm looking at the transits for right now, but at the time of that brain surgery, he likely still had transit Mercury in that 12th house, and again, Mercury it is associated with the brain. Scorpio, the sign associated with surgery. So, and another thing too, the fact that he has Mercury retrograde, it tells me that could, I see that as manifesting just in issues in general that are Mercury related, and it wouldn't exclude the brain as well. And the thing about this as well, and I'm just trying to see anything else in his chart as far as transits and natal placements that may have been tied in um, to his passing. Well, I do see that Mercury, his natal Mercury, is conjunct the ascendant, so it's not surprising. It's another indicator. I mean, the ascendant, of course, is associated with the physical body, and he also, and Mercury is associated with the brain. It's retrograde. It's not surprising if there were some issues that he had to contend with as far as the brain goes. And another thing I'm looking at too in his chart now, he also at the time had transit Uranus in his 6th house of health. And when you have transit Uranus in your 6th house, that could be an indicator of some kind of unusual, very unexpected physical related issue that one would have to deal with. Now, the thing too is that I'm just looking to see anything else in his chart that might have been tied in, sadly, to his passing. And another thing that I'm looking at as well, and as far as anything that may have been tied in with his passing during this time, is really not much else than I'm actually seeing. Um, at this time, he had the transit South Node. Looks like it was in his first house at the time he had passed away, and that could be an indicator of some issues, with the physical body that he may have had to deal with. Now, being Sagittarius being connected with the liver, the thighs, the hip, and I don't know if he actually did have any issues with that, but it would not surprise me if he did at the time of his passing. Hold on a moment, people. Now, on the good side is that he did pass away in his home, and it's said that it had to be of cardiac arrest. Well, one thing I'm noticing now is that he does have transit sun in his first house of the physical body, and the sun, of course, can be associated with the heart. And the thing about it too, another thing too, going back to the ruler of his one of the rulers of his fourth house, being Uranus in the 10th house, but being Uranus in Leo. Leo is associated with the heart, and it's an indicator perhaps that there was a very unexpected heart attack and cardiac arrest, which in most cases are very unexpected and unanticipated, of course. So this is again, and having and also having the sun in his 12th house. The sun, it does again rule the heart in astrology, being in the 12th house of endings as well. So anyway, and the only last thing is really, again, not to be redundant with this, but there's really not much more I could say in terms of looking at his chart and anything that might have been tied into his very sadly very abrupt passing. The only other thing I'm looking at, I'm noticing, is that transit Neptune was also, I'm sorry, transit Venus, not far from his natal sun at the time of his passing. And the only thing I can conclude or surmise from that is that there may have been maybe some issues Venus related, maybe with the throat as well at the time, and maybe throat or something with the neck or thyroid, but that's nothing that I really know 100%. And also something Scorpio related, but Venus is associated with the throat, the neck, the thyroid area, but it's also being in Scorpio. May have been something Scorpio related. Another thing too, if I remember right, and it's not to be derogatory, but just being factual, that there was some problems with alcohol, that I think he may have had some bouts, or something he had a combat for some time. But that's something you may want to confirm for on the internet. He does have Neptune conjunct his sun, so Neptune, of course, is associated with alcohol. The sun is associated with one's life, and can be associated with the physical body as well. And so really that's it's pretty much what I wanted to get at in terms of any transits and natal placements that might have been tied in to his passing. So anyway, it's really pretty much what I wanted get at this time. And I do I do offer my condolences and prayers to the family of Diego Maradona and close friends. Another thing too is what I'm looking at. It looks like that his that the transit Uranus was also making an opposition to his to the natal sun. So that's obviously, not only did he have transit Uranus in the 6th house of health, also opposing the sun, could be adverse as well to the physical body and one's life as well. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.